Well, I want to wish you all a very happy Valentine's Day. I hope it turns out everything that you're hoping it to be, and nothing about what you're dreading it might be. You probably know this about me by now, but especially if you're new, I am a hopeless romantic. I'm a sissy man when it comes to this kind of stuff, and I love romantic movies, and it really doesn't matter from when or when. And I love romantic movies like Casablanca, classic, An Affair to Remember, Titanic, even though it's tragic. When Harry Met Sally. Actually, any romantic movie with Meg Ryan is a golden in my book. 50 First Dates is probably one of the more recent ones. And of course, the greatest romantic movie of all time.
Star Wars.
I'm sorry, it just does not rate to The Princess Bride. Yeah, it oozes romance from beginning to end. Star Wars might be up there, though. So I have the blessing of being part of the beginning of many relationships, the most, if you would, romantic part. It's the courtship and the wedding planning of relationships. It's one of the few times a couple who's doing well seeks out a pastor. And you get to kind of see all that is going on in their relationship and the hope and the starry-eyed expectations. One of the things that we do when couples come in is we give them kind of a diagnostic. And it doesn't say whether you should get married or shouldn't get married. What it basically does is this. It says to the guy, what are your expectations of life and marriage and roles and how you live your life? And then it asks her, what's your expectation of life and roles and how things are going to work? And all it does is it says, okay, this is where they're in agreement on those things, and this is where they're not in agreement on those things. It doesn't say yay or nay. It just says, hey, they might want to talk about the fact that, he wants 12 kids and thinks that she should stay home, and she wants 1 kid and thinks that she's going to work. That might be an issue, right? And the other thing that this diagnostic does is it gives me a kind of a distortion grid, kind of how much are they looking at this relationship through rose-colored glasses. And the younger they are and the shorter they've been dating, the higher the distortion is. And it asks, for instance, one of the distortion questions are this. I know I'm giving you the cheat on this, but there's other questions I'm not going to give you, so you won't know all of them. But one of them simply says, it's always going to be as good as this. It won't get any worse. And when they say, oh, absolutely, yes, the distortion goes off the charts, right? And it's not because folks who are getting married or in a relationship, it's not that they don't know that relationships go bad. It's just that they're always the exception. Because no one's ever felt the way they felt. And no one's had the romance. I mean, maybe Wesley and Buttercup. But other than that, from The Princess Bride, in case you were wondering. Other than that, no one has ever had that kind of love. And it's it's never going to stop. And so it's a joy for me, actually, to be part of that and to kind of see that. But on the other hand, it's my job to begin to help them to look maybe beyond where they're at right now. And I'm not a great prophet. It's not like I can see into their future. But through much experience, I understand that where they're at now will change. Because I've also, like I said, get to be part of the unromantic side of daily life and marital conflict. I often tell folks who are at the beginning of relationships, especially right before they get married, or in the beginning as they get married, that marriage is God's first object lesson of humility. He's like, okay, you think you're humble and you want to follow after me. Get married. And let's try this experiment. By the way, having kids is number 2, right? But the first is marriage, and all of a sudden you run into maybe how unhumble you are and how you really didn't get what God was saying when he said, walk humbly before me. And part of the struggle of this is that much of marriage, and really this is about relationships. Right now I'm talking about marriage and dating because, it's Valentine's Day. But this really has to do with relationships, okay? But much of relationships, and especially marriage, is not about right and wrong. This is what makes it difficult. It's not about right or wrong. There is not a verse, right, for instance, to tell you, where are you going to go celebrate Thanksgiving? His family or her family? There's no verse for that. There's no verse to tell you, okay, when someone gets a promotion, how do we decide whether or not we adjust, whether the other person's going to leave their job and we're going to move, or the other person's going to quit their job because we're going to have kids, or where does the verse in the Bible say? Now, sometimes we think we find a verse for that, but there really is not a verse for that. There's not a verse for that. For instance, I wish there was verses for what do we do with our kids when they don't do their homework? My wife has one opinion and I have another. There is no right or wrong. Now, we both agree something needs to be done. But how do you decide? We do the grace approach, the real strict approach, the mid, Healthy relationships take humility because they take negotiation, because it's not always, and it's a lot oftentimes not about right or wrong. And we are different people. And the path to love is mutually serving one another and not holding grudges because the other person got in the way of my personal agenda. And you know this, but let me just say it. Relationships take work. They are hard. And that's one of the problems with that distortion thing, is that a lot of times they're in that point of relationship where everything is good because they live separately, because there's so much positive feeling and newness that all the things that drives them nuts about the other person, it just kind of, bounces off, But in time, that doesn't always happen that way. It usually doesn't happen that way. We all have different preferences. And love is accepting the other person in those differences. But here's the unfortunate thing about the world that you and I live in. And it's just as true among those who follow Christ as the rest of the world. This is about us and us here today. And that is, most of us are accustomed to demanding sacrifice from others than we are to sacrificing ourselves. Now, there's a part of you that was like, not me. I just challenge you to sit with that. Because and part of it, we've talked about this, part of it is from day one, you are told, right, to a certain degree, have it your way. Right? We tell our kids from the smallest age, especially in the West, what do you want for breakfast? What college do you want to go to? It's your choice. Pick a career that makes you happy. And so from the smallest child, right, to all the way through adulthood, we are taught, to take in consideration first and foremost our happiness. And when I walk into whatever fast food place, right, I expect them to sacrifice whatever they need to sacrifice to make me happy. Otherwise, they're not a good business. And whether we like it or not, we take that into a relationship. We take that kind of attitude into a relationship, especially because if I don't like this restaurant, I just go to another one that I do like that will bring me my coffee at whatever temperature and whatever, or will allow substitutions or will whatever. And relationship is a little difficult. Now, there are people that do that. They absolutely do that. Get in a relationship, it's all good. It gets hard. They don't bring your coffee at a certain temperature. Fine, I'll find a different relationship, right? But that's not really love, and that is definitely not relationships that thrive. And that is what our desire is, to be in relationships that thrive. And as we've kind of been looking at what does it mean to thrive, we've looked at 1 Corinthians, the love chapter, chapter 13, which says on what we're going to focus on today, that love is not rude and it is not self-seeking. It is not rude and it is not self-seeking. Now, rudeness is simply behaving indecently and causing shame for another. It's any behavior that we do that involves disgracing, embarrassing, and shaming others. And shame is kind of a universal feeling. There's a lot of different ways that we explain it. To bury one's face, to hide one's eyes, or to just want to disappear. It is a base emotion. It is one of the primary emotions that Eve felt and Adam felt in the garden, the shame, the wanting to just hide. And when we cause other people public embarrassment, the feeling of just wanting to hide, that is rude behavior. Now, there's many things in the Corinth church that highlighted rudeness. One of it was they had this meal. They were supposed to have this meal together, this supper, and then right at the end of at that time together, they would have communion and kind of start their worship service. But they would start early, and they would bring all kinds of food, and they would bring drink. And one of the things they were doing is they were getting plastered. And the other thing they were doing is they were coming early. All the folks who had money that could get off of work or didn't have to work because other people did it for them would arrive early and eat up all the food. They were also the ones that could afford the food. But those who had, the blue-collar jobs, it actually wasn't even that good, which was most of the folks. They couldn't come till later, and by the time they showed up, all the food was gone. And there wasn't much worship to be done because there was people who were drunk and out of order, and they were being rude. They were causing shame to those that could not. The other thing that 1 Corinthians mentions, there is a hard passage in chapter 11, which I'm not going to try to go through right now. I'll explain it to you because it is such a hard passage. But there's this issue about women covering their heads in worship service. All right? And here's the best way I can put it to you. All right? My wife and I wear wedding rings. Now, inherently in the Bible, there is nothing in the Bible about her wearing her wedding ring. Thou shalt wear thy wedding ring. As a matter of fact, the whole wedding ring idea is a modern Western culture where you can afford a gold ring or a silver ring or whatever, fancy ring that we put on. It's a modern invention. However, it would be an issue if my wife or wives all of a sudden decided, you know what, since it's not biblical, since it really doesn't represent anything, I'm going to take it off. Now, we'd have issue with that. Not because it's not in the Bible, but because women without their wedding ring are basically saying, I'm available. I'm not committed. At best, we're in an open relationship. That would bring me shame. That would bring me disgrace. Even though the letter of the law is not thou shalt. And so there's the same issue in the early church, and it's about head covering. It wasn't that the Bible saying thou shalt women always wear a head covering. It was in this culture and time that represented the authority. It represented her commitment to her husband, like our rings represent it. And so 100 years from now, if for whatever reason the customs change and we don't wear rings anymore, it's not like people can say, oh, well, the Bible says you got to wear a ring. No. But in this day and age, it brings shame. And so what Paul is saying is if you really love someone, you won't bring them shame. It's not just a matter of you being right. It's not just a matter of the letter of the law. It's a matter of honoring the one that you love. And honoring not just your spouse, but other people in the church. Honoring your neighbors. Self-seeking, second word, love is not self-seeking, is basically seeking one's own advantage over others. This is literally made up of two words. It's not one word. The first really means to seek as if you want to find something, like kind of hide and seek. I'm searching for something. And the second one means your own self. And so the idea here is simply that love is not one that is totally consumed, puts all its effort into seeking out what feels good and right for me. That's not the primary consumption, even though we unintentionally, right? How many times have I said to my kids, the pastor, I just want you to be happy. You know what I'm saying to them? I just want life to be orientated so that everything that you do in life makes you feel good. I'm actually reinforcing the whole idea of being self-seeking, even though I'm just trying to be a good parent. We see this again all throughout the Corinth church. We talked about this issue last week. Remember I said about food offered to idols, or in our context, it would be drinking alcohol. Even though you're free to do it, it's self-seeking to flaunt your freedom in front of, flaunt my drinking in front of an alcoholic. Even though I'm free, biblically speaking, to have a drink, not get drunk, but a drink, it is self-seeking to do that when it causes somebody else pain and harm and causes them to stumble. This idea, Paul explains a little bit more in this letter of not seeking his own in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And this is where he's talking about that food that's offered to idols. And like I said, probably the best context we have is having a beer. And Paul says this in verse 23. He says, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is permissible, but not everything is constructive. Nobody should seek his or her good, but the good of others. And really, basic English, what he's saying is this. He's saying, listen, selfishness asks the questions, is it against the rules for me to do? In other words, permissible. Is it against the rules for me to do this thing? And then internally, you kind of say, and do I like doing it? And the answer is it really is not against the rules. And two, it makes me feel good. Then selfishness is, self-seeking says, then I can do it. But love asks the question, is it beneficial to you? Love asks the question, is it helpful for you if I do that? Even though it's fine for me, even though it brings me satisfaction. The question is it helpful? Is it beneficial to you? That is love. Paul, in essence, is saying that the best measuring stick for your decision is what is best for the other person. The best measuring stick is what is best for the other person. And as he's looking at this Corinthian church, which is a lot like our church, it had real people with real problems that came in with real selfishness, who met a real God but still had a real struggle with the real self. I hope you got that, because I could never repeat what I just said.
Really?
Really. And he writes to them and says, as you're going about this, you know, some of you are proud about what you're doing because you're doing this. You're saying God, God, God. But what you're missing is the whole heart of what's in here. The whole heart of God is not found in what you do for you, but what you do for others. And you can have it memorized, And you could live by, in certain degree, by the letter of it, which is what Jesus accused, by the way, the religious leaders of all the time, and completely miss it. Because it's not just about the letter of the law. It's about the spirit, if you would, of the law of love. So, Valentine's Day, in relationships that thrive, this is what I like us to walk away with, what I like us to kind of reflect on today. Love is not about finding someone that makes you happy. Love is not about making or finding someone that makes you happy, but rather finding happiness in loving, blessing, or serving someone else. This, by the way, is a key to great relationships. And let me just kind of unpack this a little bit for you. Okay? This is the difference, when I'm talking about that distortion that young couples have. They usually say, hey, let's get married because they make each other feel good. And no one stops and says, all the other side of this person that I'm denying that's there, when that fully comes out, am I willing for a lifetime to serve that person, to bless that person? We are so, we have this romantic idea of love, right? I mean, what happens when Buttercup wants to settle in the country and Wesley wants to go settle in the swamp, right? They don't tell you the story after. They don't tell you what happens after happily ever after, because there's a lot that happens. Those castles are cold, and they had no indoor plumbing. And so one of the things that we begin to, a healthy relationship, if you're going to get into an eternal, forever contract, commitment with another person, at their worst, that's why we say for better or for worse, am I willing to serve you? Because what happens is we come in it to the other way. We come in, it says this, today you make me happy, and I'm committed to you. Now, we don't say this at the ceremony, as long as I'm happy. And then usually within the first 2 years, you find out, I don't feel happy all the time with this person. And so we begin to tell ourselves, I must have married the wrong person. I must have made a bad decision. We need to get out of this. I need to get out of this. That's not love. That is not love. That's a romanticized version of lust, really. It's a self-centeredness that says, you need to make me feel good, and I'm committed to this as long as you make. No one, by the way, can sustain that. No one. The most wonderful couples, long-lasting 20, 30, 40-year relationships that I've met of people that are still together, or friendships that are still lasting, or partnerships in business that are still lasting. They never have a story, well, it's always been sweet. We were just so in love when we first got married, and we just have not had a day where they're never like that. Test me, just ask some of those folks. Ask them. There always is a time, and usually something really huge that tests. And they stayed committed to it. They worked through it. They went to counseling. They prayed for each other. They just decided that they were going to stick through it no matter what. And something golden happens in that process. They discover love. They discover a commitment. They discover that they have found a quality in a relationship because each and the other person, or at least one of them to start, decides, you know what? I'm going to find joy in loving, blessing, and serving you. And because it is what love is. The best example I can give you Comes from what Paul writes to the church in Rome, chapter 5, verse 8. He says this. He says, but God demonstrates his own love for us. And this is important, because God could have just said, I love you in the Bible and just left it at that. But he doesn't. He demonstrated it. Just by the way, when he went to Abraham and he tested Abraham's love, he said, give me your firstborn. And then he stops him. He says, I know now, Abraham, that you love me. But God never requires of us what he himself would not do. It's the first sign of what God is going to do to fulfill his promise to mankind. And he does it. God demonstrated his love for us, that while we were, and this is huge, still sinners, Christ died for us. What this passage is saying is that when you were at your worst, when you were the most unlovable, think of that if it's safe to go there. If it's not, don't. But think of the worst period of your life. The most of the time where you were, at least you felt completely and utterly unlovable, and maybe it was justifiable. At that moment, God says, let me show you how much I love you. Let me leave the throne of heaven. Let me take on the limitations of human flesh and the feelings of abandonment and abuse. Let me feel the full pain of the worst torture that mankind can think of and be innocent of all charges. And then when I'm in that situation, gone through all that, I will declare, forgive them. Because this, God, is your demonstration of love for them. That is what love looks like. That is one of that's one of the reasons that we struggle with God so much, because we keep bringing our own baggage into this. Like we keep thinking that in order to, if you would, take God's bath, we have to take a shower first. We got to clean up before we can go to God. But what this is saying is no, because God chose that time when you're in the thick of the mud and muck and just the refuge of you, refuse of life. And he said, I will make you clean. I love you so much. I will do for you what you cannot do for yourself. Love was demonstrated when we had little or nothing to give. That is love. It is not the warm, gooey feelings when he finally gets Valentine's Day right. Now, that's nice. And vice versa. But that is not what love is. So I want to give you three things to think about. Okay, what does this mean in terms of if I want to live this kind of love? What are some ways to kind of get a handle on it? What do I do? First of all, I want to say that manners matter. Manners matter. That's the first thing. So in the movie, The Princess Bride, when they first meet each other, Wesley is one who does all the chores for Buttercup. And she keeps asking him to do things. And every time she asks him, Wesley says, as you wish. As you wish. And the narrator's explaining this, and what the narrator explains at the end is that she soon realized that every time that Wesley said, as you wish, what he was really saying was, I love you. And that is what manners should be. That is what manners is. It's when someone asks you to do something, or when you do it for them, it's an action that it may come across as you wish. It may come across as I'm opening a door for you. It may come across as a please or a thank you. It may come across as saying to an older person, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am. It may come across as, you know what, I just don't say anything negative to you. I don't give you any kind of negative feedback in public. It's always in private. It may look that way, but in essence, it's saying, I love you. You are valuable. And this is whether it's your neighbor, your boss, a customer, someone you're dating, your children. Don't forget not to just command manners from them, but show manners to them. It's a way of saying, I love you. Because when we're rude, when we bring shame on others, we're not loving. Even when we're, quote unquote, speaking the truth, we're not loving. We're not. The second is to serve thoughtfully. Serve thoughtfully. Now, I always share this story when I'm doing premarital counseling. One of my mentors tells this real true story. One day, he walks into the kitchen and his wife is crying. And he says to her, honey, what is wrong? And she's all, you don't love me. And this devastated. I mean, they've been married for 5 years now, and that's the last thing that he wanted her to ever feel. As a matter of fact, he intentionally made sure that every day, he says, honey, he says, every day, he says, I come up to you and I say, I love you, and I give you a pat on the butt. Of course I love you. And she says, yeah, but you don't take out the kitchen trash. And what he talks about is, yes, for 5 years, because he is committed to having her know that he loves her. And in his mind, what love would be is someone communicating that to you, because that's what he wanted, and physical affection, because that's what he wanted. But he was not loving her in the way that she received love, which was acts of service, taking out that trash. Now, of course, in man's eyes, he would explain, the trash can was never full. It might have been the top, but you could press it down. You could always room for more. But in her eyes, if he really cared about her, he would understand that she gets frustrated when she opens up to put a piece of trash in and it's at the top and she can't get it in. And so what love looks like is that it serves thoughtfully. It's that whole idea of, I don't just do what's good for me, but if I really want to bless you, I figure out what's good for you. There's this book, I actually think we have it in our resource center, called The Love Languages. And we encourage people to read this. And it talks about the 5 different ways that we receive love, like physical affection, like acts of service. And the key of not just somebody, again, that you're married to, but someone that you're working with. Is the key to a marriage. Remember, last week I talked about Benjamin Franklin, and he understood that the guy that he was in conflict with had a love of literature. And so remember, he asked to borrow that book. We talked about the Benjamin Franklin effect, right? If you're going to love someone, we need to be students of them, figure out what's love for them. My wife, I'm going to brag on her, especially since she's not here right now. She did a wonderful job of this morning. Our kids woke up, and they have a specific spot at the kitchen table that they sit at, and at their spot was a Valentine's Day card, right? And then she had gotten them each a gift that represented what they really love. So I had one kid who loves oranges. And she usually eats the whole bag, and she gets in trouble because she doesn't leave any for anyone else. Well, she had a bag of oranges waiting for her. Another kid who loves guacamole and avocados, he had 2 avocados waiting for him. Right? And so on and so for the other 2. Each person got what was unique to them. And so it's great to get a card and it's great to get chocolates, but I can guarantee you when they walk out and they see that this morning, I was gone before they got up, they're going to feel loved. It doesn't mean they're not going to whine and complain after that. But in that moment, they're going to feel loved. Today, my wife will not receive chocolates and roses, because my wife isn't particularly fond of dark chocolate or milk chocolate. She likes white chocolate. And roses are a waste because they die. She's got a green thumb. So she will get a bag of potato chips and a potted plant. Because that That's the things that she values. And what love does is it serves, but it serves thoughtfully. This is, by the way, one of the great challenges for us as a church, right? Churches all the time get together and they go, we want to do this for our community because we want to serve them. And we come up with the plans without ever asking the community, what do you want? It's one of the huge blessings of Gateway Neighborhood Centers that by God's grace, we had a group of people that came together and didn't say, this is what we're going to do for the community. We actually went to the community and say, hey, how can we serve you? And they told us. And this little church has this huge impact on the community by God's grace because we found out the community's, if you would, love language. That makes a relationship thrive. The last one is this: pray for others. Pray for others. Now, there's an obvious part of this, and then there's maybe a not so obvious part of this, okay? Let me get to the obvious part. When you pray for someone, it makes you think of them and their needs. It's one of the few times that usually prayer is about them. Now, every once in a while, we get prayer requests. Help so-and-so, da-da-da-da, treat me better, right? Help the pastor have a shorter minute. And it really is about them. It's not really about that person at all, okay? But for the most part, prayer usually, it forces us to think of the good of the other person, to get down on our knees. And I'll tell you this too. A lot of times I go into prayer because I want God to fix someone. And in the midst of the prayer, because I understand who I'm before, my prayer begins to change and say, and I know, God, that I have this part in it. And help me serve them in this. Because all of a sudden you're reminded of who you're asking and what you're asking of him and how selfish it is. And that begins to change. Praying for others. And I'm not just, again, your family. This is especially true in your relationships, especially the ones that drive you nuts, your boss or neighbor or whatever that may be. Pray for them positively. For their good, pray for them. For their blessing. Don't pray that God fix them. Pray for their blessing. Because, by the way, this is one thing I know. People who fall in love are blessed. They usually have a better attitude than if God simply just kind of, makes them move. Now, here's the other thing that prayer does. It taps you in the higher power, which requires your own heart change. Because if I can tell you anything, let me just give you a little secret. The kind of love that I'm talking about is impossible for broken humans to sustain over the long haul. We can only fake it for so long. Okay? God blesses us. This is psychology science now. God blesses us with a certain chemical. When you first meet someone in a romantic relationship, for 18 months, your body produces a chemical that produces euphoria. It kind of helps us kind of initiate. But guess what? After 18 months, that chemical stops being produced. It's amazing. That's about the time that... And at that point, we have a decision to make. Am I going to go self-seeking and I'm done with this thing, right? It takes us a little while, but that's why most marriages end about 2 years in. Or am I going to learn how to really love? And to learn isn't simply information. To learn is to have God transform your heart. When I marry folks, I give them a blessing, and usually in my blessing I say this. I say to him, may you be healthy. May you be strong. May you be willing to serve when she is weak and she's not feeling healthy and she's not. And then I say to her, may you be healthy. And the reason is because I know that at times both of them are going to hit their humanness. And my blessing is not that they don't hit humanness, because God uses that to change our character and to grow us. My blessing is I hope that when she hits it, you're like, okay, I'll serve you in this. And then vice versa. And I can tell you, that's a secret to my marriage, to Lynn and I. It is not that we have it all together, and it is not that I'm a hopeless romantic or that she's strong and steady and faithful, though both those are true. It's that when she's hit her humanness, God has answered that prayer, and for some miraculous reason, I'm ready to serve. and pour out a little extra, and totally vice versa. Probably more vice versa. And prayer, tapping in, that's the whole thing. I am powerless, right? The 12 steps, we taught them through that. The 12 steps, I am powerless. Guess what? You are powerless over being selfless in your relationships for a long period of time. Really at all, but at least for a long period of time. You are powerless. The only way that you cross that bridge is by a power greater than yourself. Hit your knees. Hit your knees. This is about, worship team, you guys can come on up. This is about, for each of us, finding relationships that thrive. That's what we're talking about, relationships that thrive. And I'm just, you don't have to take my word for it. You don't even necessarily have to take God's word for it. Though I would definitely trust God's word over mine. But seriously, just take a real look at life. A real look, a hard look. And you will find that love ultimately does not flower into this wonderful, thriving relationship when it's really about just because this makes me happy. When you find real love, when you find the situations that make you cry or break your heart or say, I want that, what you will find is someone who finds their happiness in serving someone else in an ugly time. We got to go out and celebrate Valentine's Day last night with a couple, and one of the things we talked about was the show The Big Bang Theory. And one of the things that we said that was kind of successful about the show is the way it portrayed the main character. Somebody remind me his name, I forgot. Sheldon. Okay? Sheldon is a selfish. If you looked up selfish in the science dictionary, Sheldon's picture would be there. And yet the beautiful thing about the show is they've managed to get us to care about him. And even though he's that way, his friends are faithful to him. It's actually a picture of real love. And my prayer for you and I is by the power of God, our relationships may thrive because we experience real love. I just want you to reflect that and let God turn that. We're going to spend an extra season here and just worshiping him because that really should be our first love. Because if you really want your relationships to thrive, they should flow from him. You pray with me. Father God, I thank you that as your word says, you first loved us. You do not wait for us to clean up. You don't even wait for us to wake up. You don't wait for us to say, well, at least I want to work towards loving God. When we are at our worst, wherever we are at today, you demonstrated your love by giving it all. Laying down your very life, your very glory and honor as God. And I pray, dear God, A, that we're consumed with that love, but B, that love may fill up our lives and pour out into our other relationships, especially on this day, as we celebrate love, but open our eyes clearly to what love really is. That whether we get good gifts or bad gifts, whether there's someone special today or not, love is about pouring our heart and life into others wherever they're at, just the way you did for us. Would you work that out in our heart and soul today? In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.